Hey there, everyone. Welcome back. If you're getting ready for the UPSC, that keeping up with everything going on in the world is so important, especially for international relations.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's why today we're going deep on a topic that has been in the news a lot recently, the Five Eyes Alliance, and what a potential shakeup could mean for India.
Definitely a hot topic, and we are going to be looking at some fascinating material from the Times of India to really unpack it all.
Yeah, so first, just a really quick refresher. The Five Eyes Alliance, it's this intelligence sharing network
Right. Think US, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand.
working together since World War II.
hmm
But there have been rumblings lately that things might not be so solid anymore.
Yeah, it all started with a report in the Financial Times. It was about a proposal to remove Canada from the alliance.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, apparently Peter Navarro, he was an advisor to President Trump.
Right.
He suggested it while Trump is still in office, but he denies it now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, called it crazy stuff. But still, just the fact that it was even considered,
Makes you wonder.
makes you wonder, yeah. And Trump, let's be honest, he wasn't exactly known for, being super friendly with Canada.
Especially with their, left-leaning government.
Exactly. And this kind of fits into a bigger picture, within Trump's Mad-J movement, that kind of skepticism towards traditional allies,
Right.
especially ones that aren't aligned with their ideology.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, J.D. Vance, this is a big name in that movement. He even said something pretty controversial about Britain,
Oh, what did he say?
called it the world's first truly Islamist country because of the Muslim population.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty inflammatory. So is this just, leftover drama from the Trump years, or is there a deeper shift in U.S. foreign policy happening here?
Yeah, it's a good question.
And it's fascinating because even if this whole Canada thing was just a brief idea, it does show that there might be a move towards this transactional way of thinking about alliances.
Okay, so the U.S. is maybe starting to prioritize those short-term gains over those long-standing partnerships.
Right, ones that are built on shared values, strategic cooperation, things like that.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's say that trend continues and the Five Eyes does start to fracture.
Right. What are the global implications?
I mean, this is a group that does a lot, coordinates signals intelligence SIGINT,
Yeah.
which is basically listening in on and analyzing electronic signals.
Right, communications, radar, real high-tech spy stuff.
Yeah, and much more.
And then you've got counterterrorism efforts and keeping an eye on all the global hotspots. So if this alliance gets weaker, it could actually embolden adversaries like China and Russia.
Right, yeah, I see what you mean. It kind of sends the signal that they can make bolder moves.
It does. I mean, imagine if the West can't even keep their own intelligence operations together.
Projects an image of vulnerability, yeah.
It does. And this isn't just theoretical. We have former CIA officials actually saying disrupting the Five Eyes would be a gift.
To who?
To countries like Russia, China, Iran, North Korea.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they could operate much more freely if they know that the West can't gather intelligence or respond as effectively. And the Five Eyes, it's not just about trading secrets.
Right.
It's about presenting a united front, coordinating strategies, pooling resources. If that breaks down, the consequences could be huge.
Okay, so we've talked about these global power shifts and these networks, but where does India fit into all of this? We're not officially part of the Five Eyes, but there must be some ripple effects, right?
Absolutely. A weakened Five Eyes could directly impact the quality of intelligence India receives from its partners. It's like a game of telephone.
The more whispers and the more uncertainty in the network, the more distorted the message gets.
Precisely.
So potentially less reliable information for India.
Could be. Yeah.
Not good. But hold on, is there any potential upside for India? Any kind of unexpected benefits from this?
Well, there might be. It's possible that a sidelined Canada could be forced to rethink its diplomatic approach towards India.
Okay, so you're saying Canada might actually become less antagonistic towards India if it's on the outs with the Five Eyes.
It's a possibility.
But why is that?
Well, think about the case of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, the Khalistani terrorist who was killed in Canada back in 2023.
Oh, right.
Canada used intelligence from Five Eyes to accuse India of involvement in the killing.
And India, of course, strongly denied those accusations.
Exactly. But the point is, without that same level of support from Five Eyes, Canada might have a harder time making those kinds of accusations in the future.
So potentially fewer diplomatic clashes with Canada.
It's possible.
That could be a win for India.
Okay, but what about the bigger picture? If Five Eyes falls apart, What happens to India's efforts to build closer intelligence ties with these countries?
That is the big question. India has been working towards closer intelligence collaboration with Five Eyes members,
Yep.
even discussions about potentially expanding the alliance. But if it fractures,
Could really throw a wrench into those plans. It could. And it could potentially weaken India's own intelligence gathering capabilities.
yeah.
It also raises a fundamental question about the future of intelligence sharing in a world where trust is eroding. If the Five Eyes, the gold standard of these alliances, can't hold it together, what does that mean for other partnerships?
And what does that mean for a country like India that's trying to navigate this complex geopolitical landscape and build its own strategic alliances?
Lots to think about.
Definitely a lot to think about. We're going to unpack all of this and more right after we hear from our sponsors. Stay with us. And we're back to the deep dive. Before the break, we were really getting into what a weakened Five Eyes alliance could mean for India.
And it's especially relevant, for those of you preparing for the UPSC exam. This isn't just about headlines. It's about really understanding these global forces at play, something that's crucial for anyone who wants to navigate the world of international relations.
Absolutely. And we left off with that big question. What does this all mean for India on the world stage?
Well, it's complicated, right? Lots of moving parts. But on the one hand, a fractured Five Eyes could actually create opportunities for India to step up and play a bigger role in shaping these new intelligence sharing frameworks.
So you're saying that with the old guard potentially out of the picture, India could maybe forge its own path, even become a leader in establishing new alliances.
It's not necessarily about taking over, but more about recognizing a potential power vacuum. If those existing structures crumble, someone needs to step in to fill that space. And India, with its growing economic and military might, is in a good position to do that.
I see what you mean. But wouldn't that also make India a target? Wouldn't countries like China see that as a chance to try to, undermine India's rise?
There's always that risk, of course. Anytime a nation gains power and influence, it attracts attention, good and bad. But India's already on China's radar. They've been competing for dominance in the region for decades. A weakened Five Eyes just changes the playing field.
Okay, so maybe not a complete game changer, but definitely something for UPSC aspirants to think about.
Yeah.
Let's go back to India's potential role in shaping these new intelligence sharing frameworks. What would that actually look like in practice?
It's hard to say for sure, but we can look at what's already happening. India's part of the Quad, right?
Right.
That strategic dialogue between the U.S., Japan, Australia, and India, some people see that as a way to balance out China's influence in the Indo-Pacific.
So maybe the Quad could evolve into something more formal, with a bigger focus on intelligence sharing.
That's one possibility. Or maybe we'll see entirely new alliances emerge, ones that focus on specific issues. Counterterrorism in South Asia, cybersecurity in Southeast Asia, things like that. Imagine India taking the lead in building those partnerships, using its expertise and relationships in the region.
That's a really interesting thought. And it's not just about security, right? Closer intelligence cooperation can lead to stronger economic ties, which could be great for Indian businesses.
Absolutely. And from a UPSC perspective, it's not just about understanding the Five Eyes and what might happen to it. It's about recognizing these broader geopolitical shifts and figuring out how India can use them to its advantage. It's about connecting the dots, analyzing trends, and getting a deeper sense of where India fits into this changing world.
And that's what we're all about here on the Deep Dive. But let's come back to the Five Eyes for a moment. Is this alliance really about to fall apart, or is it just going through a rough patch?
It's the big question, isn't it? Even if we put aside the drama of, a potential expulsion, there are still tensions there that we can't ignore.
You're talking about that America first versus global cooperation dilemma.
Yeah.
Like the U.S. being the most powerful member seems to be questioning these long-standing partnerships.
Right, and that creates friction with the other members who rely on the U.S. for, intelligence and security guarantees. It's like a relationship that's starting to crack a little. They still care about each other, but they're not quite sure they're on the same page anymore.
Okay, so let's say, hypothetically, that the Five Eyes manages to survive, but it's weaker than before. What does that mean for India? Is it still worth trying to get closer to these countries?
It's a tough one, a real balancing act. Because on the one hand, a fractured Five Eyes is less valuable as a partner, its intelligence capabilities would be diminished, and its political will to act decisively could be weakened.
But on the other hand, you can't just ignore them. They're still major players on the world stage with expertise and resources that could benefit India.
You're absolutely right. There's no easy answer here. It's about analysis, critical thinking, and that's what the UPSC exam is all about.
It's about being able to understand complex issues and develop informed opinions.
Precisely.
Okay, so we've talked about the Five Eyes as a whole, but there's another layer we need to consider. The domestic political situation in each of these countries.
Right, because foreign policy decisions don't happen in a vacuum. They're influenced by what's happening at home, public opinion, and the priorities of those in power.
And those internal factors can have a huge impact on how these countries interact with each other and the rest of the world.
Absolutely. So we need to take a look at the domestic political dynamics within each Five Eyes member and see how those might shape the future of the alliance and its relationship with India.
And we're back on the deep dive. We've been digging deep into the Five Eyes alliance, looking at those potential cracks and what it all means for India, especially important for those of you prepping for the UPSC.
And as we've been saying, it's not just geopolitics and intelligence sharing. We also need to think about the domestic political situations in each of these Five Eyes countries. What's happening internally can really shape a country's actions on the world stage.
Yeah, because internal politics definitely influence foreign policy decisions. So let's start with the U.S. What's the political landscape looking like there?
Well, the U.S. is always a bit unpredictable. They've got a presidential election coming up in 2028, and the outcome of that could have a huge impact on the Five Eyes. What if a candidate who's skeptical of international alliances, someone who favors a more isolationist approach, wins?
Yeah, that would be a big change. Could create a lot of uncertainty for the other members who rely on the U.S. for leadership.
Absolutely. On the other hand, if a more globally minded candidate wins, someone who sees the value in cooperation and intelligence sharing, it could revitalize the Five Eyes.
Right.
But the point is, U.S. politics are pretty unpredictable right now, and that makes it hard for other countries, including India, to anticipate how the U.S. will act.
So it's a wait-and-see kind of situation. What about the UK? They've always been a close ally of the U.S., but they've also had their own challenges lately.
Oh yeah, Brexit has definitely left its mark. It's created this sense of unease, about their place in the world, and it's forced them to rethink their relationships with other countries.
So how might Brexit influence the UK's position on the Five Eyes? Could it make them more hesitant to be involved?
It's definitely possible. They might focus more on domestic issues over global ones, or maybe they'll look to strengthen ties with other partners, like India, to make up for any loss of influence within the Five Eyes. It's all about adapting.
Okay, so the UK's got its own complexities. What about Canada? We talked about those tensions between Canada and the US under Trump. Have those eased up at all?
Things have definitely calmed down since Trump left office, but the underlying issues are still there. Canada depends heavily on the U.S. for trade and security, but they also want to be independent.
Right, pursue their own foreign policy goals.
Exactly, and sometimes those goals might clash with U.S. interests, which could create some friction within the Five Eyes.
Right, and we can't forget about Canada's large Sikh community, very politically active. That can influence how Canada approaches India. The Nijar case is a good example of how domestic politics can affect international relations. So Canada's accusations against India in that case definitely put a strain on things between those two countries.
Yeah.
So it sounds like Canada's relationship with both the U.S. and India is a bit of a balancing act.
Yeah, it is. They're trying to juggle their interests and obligations on multiple fronts. Not easy to do.
Definitely not. Okay, we've talked about the U.S., the U.K., and Canada. What about Australia and New Zealand? Do they play a big role in all of this?
They're definitely part of it, but they don't have as much influence as the bigger players. Australia, for example, has been getting closer to the U.S., partly to counter China's growing presence in the region. That alignment with the U.S. could cause some friction within the Five Eyes if other members have different priorities.
Makes sense. And what about New Zealand? They've usually had a more independent approach to foreign policy, right?
Yeah, they tend to favor diplomacy and working together with other countries over those more hardline approaches. So they might be less likely to support aggressive U.S.-led actions and might actually try to encourage more dialogue and compromise within the Five Eyes.
So a lot of moving pieces, a lot of different perspectives and priorities to keep in mind. For our listeners who are getting ready for the UPSC, what are the key takeaways here? How can they use this knowledge to prepare for the exam?
Well, first of all, it's important to understand that the Five Eyes isn't static. It's constantly changing. A network with internal tensions, evolving relationships, and a potentially weakened or fractured Five Eyes creates both risks and opportunities for India. So UPSC aspirants need to be able to analyze those complexities.
So it's not just about knowing the facts, right? It's about thinking critically about how it all works,
Yeah.
strengths and weaknesses, and how it fits into the bigger picture.
Absolutely. And connecting the dots between domestic politics and foreign policy, understanding how those internal factors influence what happens on the global stage.
Wow, this has been a real deep dive.
It has.
We've explored the Five Eyes Alliance from all angles, its history, the challenges it's facing, and what it could mean for India. Hopefully, our listeners now have a much better grasp of this complex issue. And remember, staying informed about current events like this is crucial for doing well on the UPSC exam.
Couldn't agree more. Keep researching, keep exploring different perspectives.
And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below.
We love to hear from you.
And don't forget to like and subscribe to The Deep Dive for more in-depth discussions on the issues that matter. Today's Deep Dives was based on the article Five Eyes Alliance, Cracks, Challenges, and Implications for India from the Times of India. Until next time, keep learning and stay curious.